Welcome to Javel Stories. Before we continue with the story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories, and also share the story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. The village of Arandale was a place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled between towering mountains and dense forests, it was a community untouched by modernity. The heart of the village was the Weeping River, a wide expanse of water that glimmered like liquid silver during the day. But under the light of the full moon, it transformed into something altogether eerie. The currents turned blood red, and a haunting wail filled the night air, chilling the villagers to their very bones. For generations, no one dared approach the river during these nights, fearing the curse said to befall anyone who ventured too close. Nia, a young healer with a fascination for the unknown, was the only one who dared to question the legends. She had grown up hearing the stories, but her curious nature refused to let her simply accept them. Nia lived in a small hut on the edge of the forest, her shelves lined with jars of herbs and potions she prepared for the villagers. Her skill as a healer was unmatched, and she had a reputation for tackling ailments that others deemed incurable. Yet, her true passion lay in unraveling the mysteries of the natural world. She had spent countless nights staring at the river, wondering about the truth behind its strange phenomenon. Unlike the other villagers, who whispered prayers to ward off the curse, Nia felt a pull toward the river, as if it were calling to her. She couldn't shake the feeling that its weeping was more than just a curse, it was a cry for help. This obsession set her apart, and while some admired her bravery, others feared her boldness. On the night of the next full moon, Nia made a decision. She would venture to the river, not out of recklessness, but out of a deep need to understand. As the moon rose high, she gathered her tools, a lantern, a pouch of protective herbs, and a small blade for defense. The village was silent. The only sound the rustling of leaves and the distant mournful cry of the river. Steeling herself, Nia began the short trek to the water's edge. The air grew colder with every step, and the familiar scent of the forest was replaced by something metallic and sharp. When she finally reached the riverbank, the sight before her was both beautiful and terrifying. The water glowed crimson under the moonlight, and the wails seemed to vibrate through her very soul. Nia stood there unmoving, as if the river were alive and waiting for her to make the first move. The villagers of Arandale were guardians of an old tale, passed down through generations in hushed tones around firesides. It was said that long ago, when the river still ran clear, a beautiful maiden named Eira lived by its banks. Eira was known for her unmatched kindness, her songs filling the valley with joy as she wove garlands of wildflowers. One day, a wandering warrior named Kael stumbled upon the village, weary from his travels. Kael was strong and noble, with a smile that could charm even the coldest heart. He fell deeply in love with Eira and she with him, their bond blossoming like the spring flowers that adorned the hills. But their happiness was not to last. Greedy eyes from a neighboring land sought to claim Arandale and its rich, fertile grounds, bringing with them chaos and tragedy. As the story went, Kael vowed to protect the village and its people. He rallied the villagers to stand against the invaders, fighting with the courage of 1,000 men. But the war dragged on, and Kael grew desperate. He turned to the river for strength, praying to the ancient spirits said to dwell within its depths. The villagers whispered that Kael made a pact with the spirits, trading something precious for their power. With his newfound strength, Kael defeated the invaders, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Eira vanished the night of the final battle, her songs replaced by the mournful wails that echoed from the river. Some said she had been taken by the spirits as payment for Kael's bargain. Others claimed she sacrificed herself to save the village. Whatever the truth, the river turned red under the full moon from that night onward, and Kael was never seen again. Nia listened to the elders recount the legend as she prepared herbs in her workshop. She had heard the tale countless times, yet it always left her with a sense of unease. The details were vague, and each storyteller seemed to add their own embellishments. Some described Kael as a selfless hero, others hinted at darker motives. Eira, too, remained an enigma, a beacon of purity or a tragic pawn, depending on who told the story. As the elders spoke, Nia's mind wandered to the river. She couldn't help but feel that the legend was more than just a tale. The river's cries were too real, its crimson waters too vivid to be dismissed as mere folklore. Determined to uncover the truth, Nia resolved to trace the story to its roots, even if it meant confronting forces beyond her understanding. The moon hung high, casting a pale glow over the village as Nia approached the riverbank for the second time. This time, she came with purpose, her mind filled with the echoes of the legend and a gnawing curiosity that refused to let her rest. The wails had already begun, low and mournful, growing louder as she drew closer. The crimson waters shimmered under the moonlight, a hauntingly beautiful sight that seemed both alive and foreboding. Nia could feel the cold air wrapping around her, each breath sharp and laced with an unnatural chill. She stood at the edge of the river, her lantern casting flickering shadows, and waited. Though she didn't know what she expected, the air felt heavy with anticipation, as if the river itself was aware of her presence. As Nia stood in silence, the cries intensified, no longer distant but close and piercing. The surface of the water began to ripple unnaturally, though there was no wind. Nia's heart raced, yet she held her ground, determined to uncover the truth. Then she saw it, a faint figure rising from the water, its form translucent and shifting like mist. The figure took the shape of a woman, her face obscured by a veil of flowing hair, her hands outstretched as if pleading for something lost. Nia felt a pang of sadness, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The spirit radiated sorrow, a grief so deep it seemed to seep into the earth itself. Though the figure spoke no words, its presence was overwhelming, a silent cry for help that resonated with Nia's very soul. The moment was fleeting. As quickly as the spirit appeared, it began to dissolve, the crimson waters swirling violently, as if agitated by her departure. The wails ceased, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. Nia stood frozen, her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. It was no mere illusion, she was certain of that. The spirit's sorrow had been palpable, its plea undeniable. Questions flooded her thoughts. Was this the maiden Eira, trapped by the curse as the legend claimed? Or was it something else entirely, something the villagers had misunderstood? Nia clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. Whatever this spirit was, it needed her help. She turned away from the river, her steps steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within her. She would not let fear deter her. The answers lay ahead, and she was determined to find them, no matter what the cost. The following days were restless for Nia. Her encounter with the spirit at the river haunted her, its sorrowful presence lingering in her thoughts like a shadow. As she worked in her hut, preparing remedies and tending to the sick, she found herself distracted, her mind returning to the figure in the crimson waters. The villagers noticed her quiet demeanor but said nothing, wary of the healer's newfound fascination with the cursed river. Nia, however, could not ignore the pull she felt. The spirit's appearance was no coincidence, and she was certain it had chosen her for a reason. She began to search for answers, poring over the fragmented tales and legends passed down in Arandale, hoping to piece together the truth hidden within them. One evening, as Nia walked along the forest edge near her hut, she noticed a strange sensation in the air. The usual stillness was replaced by a faint breeze, warm yet unsettling, carrying with it whispers she couldn't quite discern. She stopped in her tracks, listening intently. The whispers grew louder, weaving together into something almost recognizable. It was a song, haunting and beautiful, filled with longing and despair. The melody seemed to come from all directions, as if the forest itself was alive with the sound. Nia's skin prickled, and she felt a strange compulsion to follow the wind. She moved cautiously, her lantern lighting the way, her heart pounding with both fear and curiosity. The song guided her deeper into the woods, to a place she had never ventured before. At the end of the trail, Nia stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers. Beneath the tree was a small stone altar, weathered by time but still intact. Symbols were carved into its surface, their meanings unknown to Nia, but they felt familiar, as if she had seen them in her dreams. As she stepped closer, the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. She knelt before the altar, running her fingers over the carvings. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a faint voice. "Find the truth," it said, so softly she almost doubted she'd heard it. But the voice, like the song, stirred something deep within her. Nia rose, clutching her lantern tightly. The spirit's sorrow was connected to this place, she was certain of it, and if the wind spoke the truth, her journey was just beginning. Nia could not shake the strange feeling that the wind and the altar were connected to the spirit at the river. The faint voice urging her to find the truth lingered in her mind, like a thread pulling her toward something hidden. That night, as she lay in her bed, sleep eluded her. The whispers of the forest and the sorrowful wails of the river echoed in her thoughts, blending together in an unsettling harmony. Her lantern flickered on the small table beside her, casting faint shadows on the walls. Just as her eyes began to close, a sudden chill filled the room. It was as if the air had been drawn out, replaced by something heavy and unseen. Nia sat up, her heart pounding, and saw a faint glow at the edge of her vision. The glow intensified, and before Nia could react, she was enveloped by a strange sensation. It was not painful, but it was disorienting, a pulling, as though she were being lifted from her body and transported elsewhere. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her room. She stood in a place that felt both familiar and alien, bathed in golden light. Before her was the river, but it was not weeping. Its waters ran clear, sparkling like precious gems under the sun. The village of Arandale looked younger, its houses freshly built and vibrant. People moved along the riverbank, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Nia realized she was witnessing the past, a time long before the curse took hold. Her breath caught as she saw two figures near the river, a woman with flowers in her hair and a man dressed in armor. The woman was unmistakably Eira, her presence radiating kindness and warmth even from a distance. The man beside her must have been Kael, the warrior of the legend. They stood close, their expressions tender as they exchanged what appeared to be promises. But as Nia stepped closer, the scene began to shift. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the vibrant village seemed to decay before her eyes. The river darkened, its clear waters turning murky and violent. Eira's figure blurred, her joyful demeanor replaced by despair. Kael's once gentle face hardened, his gaze filled with desperation. Nia watched as Kael approached the river, kneeling before it with outstretched hands. Though she could not hear his words, his pleading posture was clear. The water shimmered, and a ghostly hand emerged, reaching toward him. Eira appeared in the distance, her cries unheard as she ran toward the river. Then, everything dissolved into darkness, and Nia was back in her bed, gasping for air. The vision left Nia shaken. It was more than a dream. It was a glimpse into the events that had shaped the river's curse. Eira's despair, Kael's desperation, and the river's haunting sorrow were connected in ways she didn't yet understand. But one thing was certain. The spirit wanted her to see this. It was showing her fragments of the truth, urging her to piece them together. Nia clenched her fists, her resolve stronger than ever. She had to delve deeper into the past to uncover what had truly happened that fateful day. The spirit's pain and the curse that bound it would not be ignored. Nia awoke the next morning with a sense of purpose that burned brighter than ever. The vision from the night before was more than a memory, it was a call to action. She could no longer ignore the pull of the river and the spirits tied to it. The fragments she had seen were vivid yet incomplete, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. She packed her satchel with the essentials, her lantern, herbs for protection, and a small notebook where she recorded her findings. Nia knew she was embarking on a journey not just through the forest or the riverbanks, but into the depths of a mystery that had haunted Arandale for generations. Her first stop was the village elder, a frail man named Doran who had lived longer than anyone in Arandale. Though his memory often faltered, he was the keeper of many ancient tales. Nia found him seated outside his modest home, carving shapes into a piece of wood. She hesitated for a moment, knowing how the villagers feared discussions about the river. But Doran, though wary, listened as she described her vision. His eyes, clouded by age, flickered with recognition. "You've seen what no one dares to remember," he said after a long pause. He spoke of an old path, hidden in the woods, that led to ruins where the river's history was said to be inscribed. Few dared to walk it, for it was believed to be guarded by restless spirits. Nia thanked him, her determination outweighing her fear. Following Doran's directions, Nia ventured into the forest. The air grew heavier as she walked, the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an eerie stillness. The path was overgrown, barely visible under years of moss and decay. As she pushed forward, she felt the forest watching her, its presence both protective and foreboding. After what felt like hours, she arrived at a clearing. There, amidst the thick trees, stood the ruins Doran had spoken of. Broken pillars jutted out from the earth, their surfaces carved with intricate symbols. At the center lay a crumbling stone tablet, its surface marked with what looked like a map. Nia traced her fingers over the carvings, her mind racing as she recognized the shapes of the river and the surrounding mountains. This was no ordinary map. It was a guide to the river's secrets. The tablet's inscriptions were faded but clear enough to reveal an important clue. They spoke of an ancient pact between the river and the people of Arandale, a bond forged through sacrifice and upheld by faith. But the carvings also hinted at a betrayal, a moment when the pact was broken and the river's wrath awakened. Nia felt a chill as she read the final line. Etched deeper than the rest, "Only the unbroken spirit can restore what was lost." She didn't yet understand its meaning, but she knew it was crucial to her quest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ruins, Nia turned back toward the village. The path ahead was clear. She would follow the map and uncover the truth buried beneath the river's sorrow. Nia stood at the edge of the map she had drawn from the carvings on the stone tablet, her heart racing as she prepared to enter the forgotten forest. The forest, shrouded in mystery, was a place no villager dared venture into. Stories of those who entered and never returned were whispered in hushed tones, their fates unknown. Yet as the sun rose, casting golden light on the dense thicket before her, Nia felt no fear, only resolve. Armed with her lantern, a small blade, and a pouch of protective herbs, she stepped into the woods, the trees closing around her like a silent audience. The air was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of moss and earth, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. The forest was unlike any place Nia had been. The trees stood tall and ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled as though shaped by time itself. Light barely pierced the canopy, casting the ground in a perpetual twilight. As she moved deeper, the path became less discernible, swallowed by years of neglect. Yet, something guided her, a faint pull, as if the forest recognized her intent. She noticed strange markings etched into the trees, symbols similar to those she had seen on the tablet. They seemed to point her forward, their patterns forming a trail only she could perceive. With each step, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped her, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. After hours of walking, Nia arrived at a clearing, its atmosphere markedly different from the rest of the forest. The space was dominated by an enormous tree, its roots sprawling like veins across the ground. The air here was charged, almost alive, and Nia felt a presence watchful and ancient. At the base of the tree was a stone archway, partially obscured by vines. The markings on the arch matched those on the tablet, confirming she was in the right place. As she approached, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it faint whispers. Nia knelt before the archway, brushing away the vines to reveal more inscriptions. They told of a sacred bond between the river and the forest, forged to protect the village from harm. But they also spoke of betrayal, a moment when the bond was broken and the forest's guardian spirit retreated, leaving the river to its grief. Nia could feel the weight of the forest's sorrow pressing against her. This place, like the river, carried the echoes of a tragedy that had yet to be resolved. As she stood, the whispers grew louder, forming a melody she recognized from her earlier vision. It was Eira's song, haunting and full of longing. The song seemed to emanate from the archway, beckoning her to step through. Though she couldn't see what lay beyond, Nia knew this was the next step in her journey. With a deep breath, she tightened her grip on her lantern and stepped through the archway, ready to uncover the secrets the forgotten forest had guarded for centuries. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it faint whispers. Nia knelt before the archway, brushing away the vines to reveal more inscriptions. They told of a sacred bond between the river and the forest, forged to protect the village from harm. But they also spoke of betrayal, a moment when the bond was broken and the forest's guardian spirit retreated, leaving the river to its grief. Nia could feel the weight of the forest's sorrow pressing against her. This place, like the river, carried the echoes of a tragedy that had yet to be resolved. As she stood, the whispers grew louder, forming a melody she recognized from her earlier vision. It was Eira's song, haunting and full of longing. The song seemed to emanate from the archway, beckoning her to step through. Though she couldn't see what lay beyond, Nia knew this was the next step in her journey. With a deep breath, she tightened her grip on her lantern and stepped through the archway, ready to uncover the secrets the forgotten forest had guarded for centuries. Chapter 8. The spirit world awaits. As Nia stepped through the archway, the air shifted around her. The dense forest behind her seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming stillness. The light grew dim, yet her lantern burned brighter, its warm glow casting long shadows on the ground beneath her feet. The path before her was unlike anything she had ever seen, a bridge of smooth stone suspended over an expanse of swirling mist. The mist moved as though alive, curling and twisting in intricate patterns that seemed to whisper secrets she could not yet understand. This was no ordinary place. Nia realized she had crossed the boundary between the mortal world and something far greater, the spirit world. The landscape ahead was both beautiful and unnerving. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in ethereal clouds that pulsed with faint light. Streams of glowing water flowed through the land, their currents defying gravity as they twisted upwards toward the sky. Strange, luminous plants lined the path, their petals glowing softly in shades of blue and green. Yet, despite the beauty, the air was heavy with sorrow, a feeling that pressed against Nia's chest with every step she took. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the lantern and the occasional distant echo of a mournful cry. As she walked, Nia became aware of shapes moving within the mist. They were faint at first, flickering in and out of sight like shadows on water. Then, one by one, they began to solidify. These were spirits, some humanoid, others taking the form of animals, all translucent and glowing faintly. They watched her with eyes full of emotion, some curious, others wary, and a few radiating hostility. Nia gripped her lantern tightly, knowing it was her only protection in this strange realm. She whispered a prayer under her breath, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. The spirits did not approach, but their presence was palpable, a reminder that she was an intruder in their world. The path led her to a grand clearing, dominated by an enormous pool of water. The surface of the pool was unnaturally still, reflecting the swirling sky above. At its center stood a figure, a woman cloaked in flowing veils, her form shimmering like moonlight on water. Nia felt a chill as she realized this was the same spirit she had seen at the river. The figure turned slowly, her face obscured but her presence unmistakably filled with sorrow. Nia stepped closer, her voice steady as she spoke into the silence. "I have come to help." The spirit raised a hand, and the air around Nia shifted violently, the whispers of the mist rising to a deafening roar. Then everything went still. A single word echoed through the space, resonating deep within Nia's soul. Truth. The spirit vanished, leaving behind only the rippling surface of the pool. Nia knew this was just the beginning. The spirit world held the answer she sought, but it would not give them easily. Nia stood on the edge of the still pool, the spirit's parting word, truth, ringing in her ears. The silence that followed was heavy, as though the very air waited for her next move. The glow of her lantern seemed dimmer now, struggling against the eerie luminescence of the spirit world. The pool reflected her image with unsettling clarity, its surface rippling faintly despite the absence of wind. She knew she had crossed a threshold, entering a place where the rules of her world no longer applied. Her resolve firmed as she knelt by the pool, her reflection shifting slightly. Almost as if it were alive, it was an unspoken invitation, and Nia knew the spirit had left this as her next trial. She hesitated, then reached out to touch the surface. The moment her fingers grazed the water, a cold sensation rushed through her, pulling her downward. She gasped but found no resistance as the world around her dissolved into swirling light. She landed on solid ground moments later, her surroundings transformed. This new realm was darker, with shadows twisting unnaturally around her. The sky above was a swirling mass of stars, as though she stood at the edge of the universe. Towering structures of crystalline rock surrounded her, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns glowing faintly. The air hummed with energy, alive with whispers too faint to understand. Each step she took resonated with a low vibration, as if the ground itself acknowledged her presence. As she moved forward, the landscape seemed to shift with her. Pathways materialized where none had been, while others disappeared behind her, closing off any thought of retreat. The spirits she had seen earlier in the mist now lingered closer, their forms clearer. They observed her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to unease. Some followed her silently, their translucent shapes flickering like candlelight, while others melted back into the shadows as if unwilling to be seen. Nia's heart raced, but she kept moving, her lantern held high. The symbols on its glass glowed faintly, reacting to the energy of the spirit world. She felt it was more than a light, it was a guide, an anchor that kept her tied to her purpose. Her journey led her to a vast chasm, its depths obscured by a dense fog that shimmered faintly with an otherworldly glow. A narrow bridge of stone spanned the gap, appearing impossibly fragile. Nia hesitated, her pulse quickening as she gazed into the void below. Then a soft melody reached her ears, a song so haunting and beautiful that it pulled her forward despite her fear. She stepped onto the bridge, the stone firm under her feet, though it swayed slightly with her weight. The song grew louder as she crossed, weaving together emotions of hope and despair. When she reached the other side, the melody abruptly stopped, replaced by a sudden, deafening silence. Before her stood a massive gate, carved from black stone and inlaid with shimmering gold. Its surface was adorned with symbols she recognized from the ruins and the riverbank. Nia knew this gate marked the threshold to the answers she sought. With a deep breath, she placed her hand on the cold surface, ready to face what lay beyond. The massive gate groaned as Nia pressed her hand against it, the golden symbols shimmering and shifting under her touch. A chill ran through her body as the stone began to move, sliding open with a grinding sound that reverberated through the air. Beyond the gate was a vast expanse bathed in a dim, ethereal light. The ground sparkled like powdered silver, and the air shimmered as though alive with unseen energy. At the center of the expanse stood a solitary figure, her silhouette illuminated by a soft, otherworldly glow. Nia's breath caught as she recognized the spirit of the maiden, the same sorrowful presence she had encountered at the river and in her vision. But here, she was fully formed, her features clear, and her presence overwhelming. The maiden turned slowly, her eyes meeting Nia's with an expression of profound grief. Her face was delicate, framed by flowing hair that seemed to merge with the light around her. Her hands were clasped tightly, as if holding on to something precious and fragile. She stepped forward, her movements graceful yet hesitant, as though unsure of the mortal who had entered her domain. Nia felt an inexplicable wave of emotion wash over her, sadness, longing, and an unspoken plea for understanding. She wanted to speak, to reassure the spirit of her intentions, but the weight of the moment held her silent. The maiden raised her hands, and the air around them shimmered, forming images that played out like fragments of a forgotten memory. The visions revealed moments from the maiden's life, her laughter by the riverbank, her hands weaving garlands of flowers, and her gaze filled with love as she looked upon a warrior clad in shining armor. Then came the shift. Darkness encroached, and the warrior's face hardened with desperation. The river turned crimson as the maiden's image blurred, replaced by chaos and sorrow. Nia watched in silence, her heart aching as the spirit's pain unfolded before her. The visions faded, and the maiden's sorrowful gaze met hers once more. A single tear fell from the spirit's eye, crystallizing as it touched the ground. The wordless plea was clear. She was trapped, bound by a pain that could not be spoken but must be understood. Nia knelt before the maiden, her lantern glowing softly in the dim light. "I will help you," she whispered, though she doubted the spirit could hear her words. The maiden reached out, her hand passing through Nia's with a touch that was cold and fleeting. Another vision emerged, this time of the stone tablet Nia had found in the forest. The inscriptions glowed brightly, their meaning now clear. Only the unbroken spirit can restore what was lost. The maiden's form began to fade, her sorrowful expression lingering even as her light dimmed. Nia stood, her resolve unshaken. The spirit had shown her the path forward. She had to uncover the betrayal that had shattered the bond between the river, the forest, and the village. Only then could she begin to free the maiden from her eternal grief. Nia returned to the mortal world through the same archway that had brought her into the spirit realm, her mind heavy with the images the maiden had shown her. The river's sorrow was not a simple curse, but the result of a bond broken by betrayal. Yet the fragments of the story were still incomplete. She needed to understand not only the maiden's pain, but also the warrior's role in the tragedy. Kael, the warrior immortalized in the villagers' tales, had been painted as a hero, but Nia's vision hinted at a darker truth. Determined to uncover his side of the story, she sought out the oldest records kept by the elders of Arandale, searching for answers buried in the past. The village records were scarce and fragmented, as if the people had wanted to forget what had transpired. But Nia persisted, sifting through faded parchments and crumbling scrolls. She found scattered mentions of Kael, described as a brave outsider who had arrived during a time of turmoil. The invaders were real, as was the warrior's promise to defend the village. Yet there were inconsistencies in the accounts. Some described Kael as a selfless protector, while others hinted at a man driven by ambition and desperation. One record, hidden beneath a pile of weathered books, caught her attention. It spoke of a pact Kael had made with the spirits of the river, trading something precious in exchange for power to defeat the invaders. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. Kael's victory came at a cost. The words lingered in Nia's mind as she returned to the river that evening. She stood at the water's edge, her lantern flickering as the first tendrils of moonlight touched the surface. The crimson hue began to spread, and the mournful wails echoed once more. Nia closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts on Kael. "Show me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the cries of the river. The lantern's light brightened, casting long shadows over the water. Suddenly, the surface rippled, and another vision began to take shape. She saw Kael kneeling by the river, his armor tarnished and his expression desperate. The spectral hand of the river's spirit reached out to him, offering power in exchange for something unspoken. Kael hesitated, his gaze turning toward the village in the distance. Then, with a firm nod, he accepted the spirit's offer. The water shimmered, and Kael rose, his strength restored. But the vision did not end there. As Kael walked away from the river, his steps heavy with determination, the spirit's sorrow deepened. In the shadows, Eira appeared, her expression one of anguish as she watched the pact unfold. Nia felt the weight of Eira's silent cry. Kael's choice had been made without her, and its consequences would soon consume them both. The vision dissolved, leaving Nia breathless by the riverbank. She now understood that Kael's heroism was not as pure as the villagers believed. His actions, though intended to protect, had fractured the sacred bond between the river and the people. The truth was closer, but the full story remained elusive. Nia knew she had to delve deeper, uncovering not only what Kael had sacrificed, but why the spirits had exacted such a devastating price. The next morning, Nia awoke with the heavy burden of the revelations about Kael. His pact with the river spirits explained much, but it left a deeper question unanswered. Why had Eira, the kind-hearted maiden, been drawn into the curse? The visions had shown her anguish, her despair as she witnessed Kael's desperate choice, but they had not revealed her role in the tragedy. Nia felt that Eira's pain held the key to unraveling the mystery. Determined to learn more, she sought guidance from the spirits once again, knowing that the answers she needed could only come from those bound to the river's sorrow. As night fell, Nia returned to the riverbank, the crimson waters glimmering under the moonlight. She lit her lantern and closed her eyes, allowing the rhythmic cries of the river to fill her senses. She focused on Eira's face, the haunting image of her sorrow burned into her memory. "Eira," she whispered, her voice steady, "show me your truth." The air grew cold, and the lantern's light flickered wildly. Slowly, the river's surface began to ripple, and a vision formed before her eyes. This time, it was not Kael but Eira who appeared, standing alone on the riverbank, her face pale and drawn. She was holding something in her hands, a small, intricately carved talisman that glowed faintly. Her expression was one of quiet determination, laced with sadness. The vision shifted. Showing Eira walking into the forest, the talisman clutched tightly against her chest. Nia watched as Eira approached the ancient altar beneath the great tree, the same one Nia had discovered in her journey. Eira knelt before the altar, her lips moving in silent prayer. The air shimmered as the spirit of the river appeared, its form fluid and imposing. Eira offered the talisman, her hands trembling. Though her words were inaudible, her intention was clear. She was pleading for the river's forgiveness, seeking to undo the damage caused by Kael's pact. The spirit hesitated, its translucent form flickering with uncertainty. Then, as Eira bowed her head, the spirit reached out, enveloping her in a swirl of light. The scene dissolved into darkness, leaving Nia gasping. As the vision faded, Nia's heart ached with the weight of what she had witnessed. Eira had sacrificed herself to restore the bond that Kael had broken. Her plea to the river was not one of desperation but of love for the village, for Kael, and for the balance that had been lost. Yet, her sacrifice had not freed the river. Instead, it had deepened its sorrow. The spirit had taken her offering, but the pain of betrayal lingered, binding Eira's soul to the river in an endless cycle of grief. Nia now understood that Eira's spirit was both victim and guardian, trapped between worlds by the weight of her love and loss. As she stood by the river, the wails softened, as if acknowledging her understanding. Nia's resolve hardened. She would find a way to honor Eira's sacrifice and free her from the river's sorrow. The path forward was clearer now, but the journey was far from over. The revelation of Eira's sacrifice filled Nia with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She had uncovered a crucial piece of the puzzle, but questions still lingered. If Eira had willingly offered herself to mend the bond with the river, why did the curse persist? Why did the river weep with such unrelenting grief? These thoughts consumed Nia as she wandered through the village the next day, her mind replaying the visions over and over. The villagers, sensing her distraction, kept their distance. To them, the healer had become a figure both revered and feared, a woman who walked too closely with the spirits. Yet Nia paid them no mind. She knew her answers lay beyond the stories the village clung to, hidden in the forgotten truths of the past. That evening, Nia returned to the stone tablet in the forest, hoping it might offer new insights. As she studied the inscriptions again, She noticed something she had overlooked before, a small, almost invisible carving at the edge of the tablet. It depicted two intertwined figures, one holding a blade and the other a flower, their faces obscured. Below them, the river flowed in jagged lines, its surface marked with what appeared to be tears. The image seemed to tell of a conflict, a duality between destruction and preservation. Nia's fingers traced the carvings, and she felt a sudden chill, as though the spirits themselves were urging her to look deeper. She knelt beside the tablet, brushing away the moss that clung to its edges, revealing more of the forgotten story. As the moss fell away, new symbols emerged, their meanings clear despite their age. They spoke of a moment of betrayal, not by Kael or Eira, but by the village itself. Nia's breath caught as she read the words. The villagers, driven by fear and desperation, had turned their backs on the river's guardians, severing the sacred pact that had protected them for generations. Kael's pact and Eira's sacrifice were not isolated acts of love or desperation. They were attempts to undo the damage caused by the villagers' betrayal. The curse was not merely the sorrow of the river or the pain of the spirits. It was the consequence of a collective failure, a wound inflicted by the very people the river had once nurtured and safeguarded. Nia's mind raced as she pieced together this new truth. The villagers' betrayal explained the river's anguish and the spirit's refusal to let the curse be lifted. But it also complicated her mission. To free Eira and restore the river, she would need more than the spirit's forgiveness. She would need the villagers to confront their own history, to acknowledge the role they had played in the tragedy. The weight of this realization bore down on her, but she did not waver. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Nia's resolve burned brighter than ever. She stood, her lantern casting long shadows over the ancient carvings, and vowed to see this journey through to the end. Chapter 14. Unseen Forces. As the truth unraveled, Nia felt the weight of her task growing heavier. It was no longer just about freeing Eira or uncovering Kael's decisions. It was about reconciling the entire village's past with the forces they had betrayed. Nia knew this would not be an easy path. The villagers' fear of the river and its curse had kept them silent and unwilling to question the deeper truths behind their legends. Now, she was faced with a choice: proceed alone or confront the village with the burden of its own guilt. The decision was clear. Her mission demanded both courage and honesty, even if the villagers refused to listen. That night, Nia returned to the river, seeking guidance from the spirits. The air was colder than usual, and the cries of the river were louder, more urgent. She placed her lantern by the water's edge and knelt, closing her eyes. "Show me what I must do," she whispered into the night. The river responded with ripples that glowed faintly under the moonlight, and a sudden gust of wind carried a flurry of whispers to her ears. They were fragmented and chaotic, a chorus of voices that seemed to be both guiding and warning her. The river itself seemed alive, its currents shifting and swirling as though trying to communicate something vital. Then she saw it, a faint shimmer in the distance, a shape that beckoned her to follow. Nia hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the water. The cold bit at her skin, but the pull of the shimmer was irresistible. As she waded deeper, the world around her began to change. The river's currents carried her into a space that was neither fully of the mortal world nor the spirit realm. Here, shadows moved without form, their presence oppressive and menacing. These were the unseen forces that had long lingered in the river's sorrow, feeding on the pain of the spirits and the village alike. Nia could feel their malice, a dark energy that resisted her every step. Her lantern flickered, its light dimming under the weight of the oppressive force. She gripped it tightly, her heart pounding as the shadows closed in around her. In the midst of the darkness, a single figure emerged. It was not Eira, nor was it Kael. It was something ancient and wrathful, a manifestation of the river's broken bond. Its form was shifting, its face obscured, but its presence was undeniable. The air grew heavy as the figure spoke, its voice echoing like thunder. "Why do you disturb the depths of sorrow?" it demanded. Nia steadied herself, her voice unwavering as she replied. I seek the truth and the means to restore what was lost. The figure's form flickered, and the shadows around her stirred violently. Truth comes at a price, it said, its tone both warning and challenging. The figure reached out, and in that instant, Nia felt a surge of energy pass through her, testing her resolve. She stood firm, her grip on the lantern tightening as its light began to push back the darkness. The unseen forces recoiled slightly, and the figure's presence began to waver. Nia knew this was only the beginning. The forces at play were far greater than she had imagined, but she refused to falter. The truth was within reach, and she would not be turned away. The oppressive weight of the unseen forces lingered in Nia's mind as she emerged from the river. Though the shadows had retreated and the mysterious figure had vanished, their warning echoed within her. Truth comes at a price. The lantern in her hand flickered with an unusual intensity, as though its light had absorbed some of the energy from her encounter. It glowed brighter now, guiding her steps as she followed the river upstream. Drawn by a pull she could neither explain nor resist, the terrain grew unfamiliar, the forest thickening into a labyrinth of twisted trees and dense undergrowth. Yet, her path was clear, a trail of faintly glowing symbols etched into the bark of the trees, leading her toward a destination unknown. Hours later, she arrived at a clearing unlike any she had seen before. In the center lay a vast, still body of water, its surface reflecting the sky above with perfect clarity. It was as though the lake were a mirror, capturing not just the image of the world, but the essence of everything it touched. Nia approached cautiously, her lantern's glow illuminating the edge of the water. The air here was heavy with anticipation, and the faint cries of the river were replaced by an eerie silence. The lake radiated a strange energy, one that both comforted and unsettled her. She knelt at the edge, peering into the depths. What she saw was not her own reflection, but a shifting montage of images, memories, and moments that did not belong to her. The images told a fragmented story. Eira appeared first, her face radiant with joy as she danced along the riverbank. Then came Kael, his expression solemn as he gazed at the horizon. The scene shifted abruptly to a moment of chaos. Villagers shouting, their faces contorted with fear and anger, as Kael stood alone, his sword raised. Nia watched as the lake's surface rippled, the images changing once more. Eira stood at the altar in the forest, her hands trembling as she held the glowing talisman. She was pleading with the river spirit, her voice silent but her desperation clear. Then, the scene darkened, the tranquil waters turning crimson as the spirit enveloped her. The final image was the most haunting. Kael at the riverbank, staring into the blood-red waters with a look of regret and sorrow etched into his face. The lake stilled, its surface returning to its perfect reflection of the sky. Nia sat back, her mind racing as she pieced together what she had seen. The mirror lake was a keeper of truth, showing her the past through the eyes of those who had lived it. Kael's regret, Eira's sacrifice, and the villagers' betrayal were all connected, threads woven into a tapestry of pain and loss. Yet something was missing. The lake had shown her what had happened, but not why the spirits had allowed the curse to persist. Nia realized that the price of truth was not just knowing it but understanding it deeply enough to act. She stood, her resolve stronger than ever, and turned away from the lake. Its gift had brought her closer to the answer she sought, but the journey was far from over. The final truth lay deeper within the river's sorrow, waiting for her to uncover it. The vision from the mirror lake left Nia more determined than ever to uncover the full truth. The threads of the past were slowly coming together, but the ultimate reason behind the curse and the spirit's relentless sorrow remained unclear. As she ventured farther upstream, the forest began to shift. The trees grew taller, their gnarled branches forming a canopy so dense that it plunged the world into twilight. The air grew heavier, thick with an unseen energy that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Nia sensed she was approaching a place of great power, a place where the spirits themselves convened. At last, She reached a clearing surrounded by towering stone pillars, each carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The ground was smooth and reflective, as though it had been polished over centuries by unseen hands. At the center stood a large, circular platform etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. As Nia stepped onto the platform, the air around her shimmered, and she felt a sudden rush of energy. Shadows began to coalesce at the edges of the clearing, forming into ghostly figures. One by one, the spirits emerged, their forms translucent and ever-shifting. These were no ordinary spirits. They were the river's guardians, ancient beings who had watched over the land for generations. The spirits did not speak with words, yet their presence was overwhelming, their emotions washing over Nia in waves. She felt their grief, anger, and weariness as though they were her own. One spirit stepped forward, its form towering and majestic, radiating an aura of authority. It raised a hand, and the air filled with a deep, resonant hum. Images began to appear in the air around Nia, scenes from the past that unfolded like fragments of a broken story. She saw the villagers, desperate and afraid, severing their bond with the river in an act of betrayal. She saw Kael, standing at the riverbank, his hand reaching out to the spirits in desperation. And she saw Eira, her face a mixture of love and despair as she sacrificed herself to mend what had been broken. The images faded, and the lead spirit's gaze fell upon Nia. Though it spoke no words, its message was clear. The curse persisted because the bond had never truly been repaired. Eira's sacrifice had been noble, but it was incomplete. The villagers had never sought to atone for their betrayal, leaving the spirits bound by sorrow and unable to restore balance. Nia felt the weight of their anguish, their desire for justice mingled with a deep yearning for peace. She understood now that her task was not just to free Eira, but to mend the bond between the villagers and the spirits, to heal the wounds that had festered for generations. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist. The lead spirit lingered a moment longer, its gaze steady and solemn. Nia felt a surge of energy pass through her, a silent acknowledgement of her role in the unfolding story. When the clearing was empty once more, she stood alone, the glow of the platform fading beneath her feet. The path forward was clearer now, though fraught with challenges. Nia knew she would need the village's cooperation to restore the bond, a task that would require confronting their deepest fears and long-buried guilt. With a deep breath, she turned back toward the forest, her lantern casting a steady glow as she prepared for the trials yet to come. The spirit's revelations weighed heavily on Nia as she retraced her steps back through the forest. Their pain and the persistence of the curse were tied not just to Kael's desperation or Eira's sacrifice, but to the villagers themselves. The betrayal that had broken the bond between the river and the village was rooted in fear, but also in greed. Nia pondered this as she walked, her lantern casting flickering light on the path ahead. What had the villagers sought to gain by severing the pact with the spirits? What could they have valued so greatly that they were willing to risk the harmony that had protected them for generations? As she approached the outskirts of the village, Nia decided to dig deeper into its history. She sought out Doran, the elder whose knowledge of Arandale's past had already guided her once. She found him sitting outside his home, carving shapes into a piece of wood. His frail hands trembled as he worked, and his cloudy eyes lifted when Nia approached. Without hesitation, she recounted her experiences, the visions, the spirits, and the fragments of truth she had uncovered. Doran listened in silence, his face grave as she spoke. When she finished, he sighed deeply, setting his carving aside. "The river once provided everything we needed," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "But fear is a dangerous thing. It makes people blind to what they already have. Doran revealed a secret that had been buried for generations. Long ago, the villagers had grown restless with their reliance on the river and the spirits that protected it. Whispers of a new way to harness the land's riches spread through the community, a way to gain independence from the unpredictable will of the spirits. A group of villagers, driven by ambition and greed, decided to cut ties with the river entirely. They disrupted the sacred rituals that upheld the bond, severing the connection that had sustained them for centuries. The spirits, betrayed and grieving, withdrew their protection, leaving the village vulnerable. That vulnerability was what had driven Kael to make his desperate pact, and it was the villagers' betrayal that had ultimately led to Eira's sacrifice. Nia's heart sank as Doran finished his tale. The villagers had forgotten the depth of their betrayal, choosing instead to focus on Kael's heroism and Eira's tragedy. Their silence had allowed the curse to fester, leaving the spirits trapped in an endless cycle of sorrow. "You must remind them," Doran said, his voice trembling. "They've buried the truth for too long." Nia nodded, her resolve unshaken. But she knew that confronting the villagers would not be enough. The shadows of greed and fear still lingered, feeding on the curse's power. To restore balance, she would need to confront those shadows directly, both within the village and in the river's depths. As she left Doran's home, the lantern in her hand burned brighter, a beacon against the darkness that awaited her. Nia approached the river with a growing sense of dread, the weight of the village's betrayal and the lingering presence of greed pressing heavily on her spirit. The water was calm under the midday sun, its surface deceptively serene. Yet, Nia knew the sorrow that lay beneath, hidden in its depths until the moonlight revealed its true form. She knelt at the riverbank, her lantern glowing faintly beside her. The spirits had shown her much, but she had yet to face the grief of the river itself, the source of the curse and the unrelenting cries that filled the night air. She closed her eyes, allowing the steady rhythm of the river's flow to fill her senses. It began as a faint hum, a sound she could barely distinguish from the natural world around her. But as she focused, the hum deepened, carrying with it a wave of emotion, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. It was a grief so profound, so consuming, that it seemed to echo through the very ground beneath her. The river mourned, not only for Eira and the broken bond, but for itself, its essence corrupted and its purpose lost. Nia felt the weight of centuries of sorrow, a pain that had festered in silence, unacknowledged and unresolved. The lantern's light grew stronger, and the air around Nia shifted. The surface of the river rippled, and a figure began to emerge. It was not Eira this time, nor the spirits who had guided her before. This presence was different, larger, more ancient, and far more powerful. The river itself seemed to rise, its form taking shape as a towering, translucent being made entirely of water. Its face was indistinct, its features constantly shifting like waves in a storm. Yet its eyes glowed with an intensity that pinned Nia in place. The being exuded an overwhelming sadness, but beneath that sadness lay a quiet fury. "Why have you come?" The river's voice echoed, resonating through the air like the rush of a great current. Nia swallowed her fear and spoke, her voice steady despite the weight of the river's presence. "I seek to understand," she said, "to heal what was broken and free those bound by this curse." The river's form shuddered, its glow dimming. "Heal," it repeated, its tone laced with bitterness. "The wound runs too deep. Betrayal, greed, and sacrifice, none of it has brought peace." Nia's chest tightened as the river's grief washed over her, but she did not waver. "The villagers have forgotten," she said, "but I will make them remember. Their greed broke the bond, and their silence has allowed the curse to endure. I will remind them of their part in this." The river's gaze bore into her, and for a moment the air was still. Then the being began to dissolve, its form merging back into the water. "Go," it said, its voice softer now, tinged with a flicker of hope. "But know this, the grief of the river cannot be soothed by words alone." As the river returned to its natural state, Nia stood, her resolve unshaken. She understood now that the curse was not just a punishment, It was a reflection of the pain and loss suffered by all those bound to the river. To lift it, she would need more than the villagers' acknowledgement. She would need to rebuild the bond that had been broken, to restore the trust and harmony that had once united the river and its people. With the lantern's light guiding her, she turned back toward the village, ready to confront the truths that had been buried for far too long. Nia's return to the village marked a turning point in her journey. The revelations she carried weighed heavily on her, but she knew the time had come to confront the villagers with the truth. She had spent days unraveling the past, Kael's desperation, Eira's sacrifice, and the villagers' betrayal, and the full scope of the curse was now clear. The river's grief was not its own, but a mirror of the pain inflicted by the people it had once nurtured. As she walked through the village square, her lantern glowing faintly at her side, the villagers turned to watch her, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. They had come to fear her connection to the river and the spirits, yet they could not deny her importance. Nia called for a gathering, her voice firm and unyielding. The villagers hesitated at first, whispering among themselves, but one by one they gathered in the square. Doran, the elder, stood near the front, his expression grave but supportive. When the crowd had assembled, Nia began to speak. She recounted everything she had uncovered: the villagers' betrayal of the river's guardians, Kael's pact with the spirits, and Eira's sacrifice to mend what had been broken. Her words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. The villagers listened in stunned silence, their faces pale as the weight of their forgotten history settled over them. When she finished, a heavy stillness fell over the square, broken only by the distant sound of the river's mournful cries. At first, the villagers resisted. "We were only trying to survive," one voice called out, trembling with both fear and defensiveness. Another shouted, "The spirits abandoned us. What else could we have done?" Their words were laced with guilt, anger, and denial, but Nia held her ground. "You did not survive," she replied, her voice resolute. "You have lived in fear and sorrow ever since. The curse is not a punishment, it is the consequence of what you chose to ignore." Her words struck a nerve, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Doran stepped forward, his frail voice carrying above the noise. "She speaks the truth," he said. "We have forgotten what we owe to the river and its guardians. We have allowed fear to blind us, but it is time to remember." The elder's words silenced the crowd, and Nia seized the moment. "The spirits do not seek revenge," she said. "They seek reconciliation. But they cannot forgive what you refuse to acknowledge. The bond must be rebuilt, not with words, but with actions. The river cries for the truth, and it is time you answered." Her lantern flared as she spoke, its light casting long shadows over the gathered villagers. One by one, their faces softened, their fear giving way to something deeper: shame, regret, and a fragile glimmer of hope. Nia knew this was the breaking point. The villagers had begun to see the truth, but their journey toward atonement was only beginning. As the crowd dispersed, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. The road to reconciliation would be long and fraught with challenges, but she would guide them every step of the way. The villagers' initial resistance to Nia's revelations began to soften in the days that followed. The weight of their forgotten history, coupled with the undeniable truth of the river's sorrow, lingered in every corner of the village. Nia became a focal point of their reflection, her lantern's steady glow a symbol of guidance in a time of reckoning. She spent her days speaking with them individually, drawing out memories buried beneath years of fear and denial. Some villagers remembered fragments of the old rituals, while others spoke of dreams in which the spirits had called to them. These small pieces of the past, fragile and scattered, began to form the foundation of a renewed understanding. One evening, a young boy approached Nia as she sat by the river, her lantern flickering beside her. He carried a bundle of herbs tied with a faded ribbon and offered it to her with trembling hands. "I found these near the old altar," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandmother used to say they were sacred to the river." Nia accepted the gift with gratitude, her heart lifting at the boy's bravery. His simple act was a glimmer of hope, a sign that the village could begin to repair the bond they had broken. She placed the herbs into the water, watching as they floated downstream, carried by the river's gentle current. The boy's offering was small, but its significance was immense, a first step toward reconciliation. As the moon rose that night, the river's cries seemed softer, less anguished. Nia felt the faintest stirring of a shift, as though the river itself had acknowledged the villagers' tentative efforts to heal. The spirits, too, seemed less distant, their presence more tangible in the stillness of the night. Nia knew the journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but this moment of connection filled her with renewed determination. The village had begun to change, and with it, the possibility of mending the bond that had been shattered so many years ago. Despite the progress, Nia knew the road to reconciliation was far from complete. The villagers' offerings and newfound understanding were only the beginning. To truly restore balance, they would need to confront the spirits directly and seek their forgiveness. This would not be easy. The spirits' grief was ancient and deeply rooted, and the villagers' actions alone might not be enough to heal the wounds. Nia felt the weight of this realization as she prepared for the next step in her journey. The spirits had guided her thus far, but their ultimate test lay ahead, a trial that would determine whether the bond could be restored or whether the curse would endure. One night, as Nia meditated by the river, a vision came to her. The lantern's glow intensified, its light refracting into patterns that danced across the water's surface. She saw the familiar shape of the spirit council, their translucent forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. This time, they did not remain silent. The bond was broken by the many, they said, their voices resonating as one. It cannot be mended by the few. Nia understood their meaning. The village as a whole needed to take responsibility, not just in words but in action. The trial they spoke of would test their collective willingness to atone. If they failed, the curse would deepen, and the river's sorrow would consume them all. The spirits revealed the location of the trial, a hidden sanctuary deep within the forest, a place where the bond between the village and the river had first been forged. Nia knew she could not face this trial alone. She gathered the villagers, speaking with urgency and conviction. "This is your chance to make amends," she told them. "But it will require courage, honesty, and sacrifice. The spirits will not accept half measures." Her words struck a chord, and though fear lingered in their hearts, the villagers agreed to accompany her. Together, they set out into the forest, their lanterns casting a fragile light against the encroaching darkness. The journey to the sanctuary was fraught with challenges. The forest seemed to test them at every turn, its paths twisting into labyrinths that threatened to lead them astray. The air grew heavy with an unseen energy, and the villagers whispered nervously as shadows flickered at the edges of their vision. Nia walked at the front of the group, her lantern's glow unwavering as it guided their way. She could feel the spirits watching, their presence both protective and foreboding. The villagers clung to one another, their fear palpable, but their determination to reach the sanctuary remained. As they neared their destination, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and more ancient, their gnarled branches forming a dense canopy overhead. Strange symbols appeared on the bark, glowing faintly in the dim light. Nia recognized them as the markings she had seen at the Mirror Lake and the altar. They were memories, fragments of the bond that had once existed between the village and the river. The villagers, too, began to remember. They spoke of rituals they had watched as children, songs their elders had sung, and the deep connection they had once felt to the river. These memories, long buried, began to surface, filling the group with a sense of both loss and hope. At last, they reached the sanctuary, a vast clearing dominated by an enormous stone altar. The air here was thick with the presence of the spirits, and the villagers hesitated at the edge of the clearing, their fear holding them back. Nia stepped forward, her lantern glowing brighter than ever. "This is where it began," she said, her voice steady, "and this is where it must be mended." She turned to face the villagers, her gaze unwavering. "The spirits are watching. Show them that you remember. Show them that you are ready to make amends." Slowly, one by one, the villagers stepped into the clearing, their lanterns casting flickering light on the altar. Together, they began to sing an ancient melody passed down through generations, a song of gratitude and unity that had once bound them to the river. As the villagers' voices rose in harmony, the air in the sanctuary began to shift. The glow of their lanterns merged with the faint light of the altar, creating a shimmering aura that enveloped the clearing. The spirits began to appear, their translucent forms emerging from the shadows. They surrounded the villagers, their presence both powerful and solemn. Nia watched as the villagers fell silent, their faces filled with awe and trepidation. The spirits moved among them, their energy palpable. It was as though they were testing the villagers, searching their hearts for sincerity and truth. The lead spirit, a towering figure with an aura of authority, approached the altar. It raised its hand, and the air filled with a deep, resonant hum. The bond was broken, the spirit intoned, its voice echoing through the clearing. "Show us it can be restored." The villagers hesitated, their fear threatening to overcome them. Nia stepped forward, her voice steady. "The bond can only be mended if you act as one," she said. "The river's sorrow is your sorrow. Its pain is your pain. Together you must give what was taken and more." Her words galvanized the group, and one by one, the villagers stepped forward, offering what they could. Some brought herbs and talismans, others recited prayers, and a few simply knelt in silence, their hands pressed to the ground. The spirits seemed to grow brighter with each offering, their forms solidifying as the bond between them and the villagers began to reform. Nia felt the energy in the air intensify, a surge of hope and renewal that filled the sanctuary. Yet, she knew the trial was not yet complete. The spirit's sorrow was deep, and their forgiveness would require more than gestures. The villagers' offerings were a beginning, but the true test lay in their willingness to confront the shadows of their past and embrace the responsibility of their future. The sanctuary pulsed with an almost unbearable energy, the spirit's sorrow and the villagers' tentative offerings creating a tension that filled the air. The villagers had begun to remember their bond with the river, but the process was far from complete. The spirits, though present and watching, remained distant, their forms flickering like flames caught in a gust of wind. Nia sensed their hesitation, their ancient grief resisting the villagers' attempts to mend what had been broken. The lantern in her hand glowed steadily, its light a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. She knew the true test had yet to come. The sky above the clearing began to change, the soft light of the sanctuary replaced by swirling clouds that darkened unnaturally. A low rumble echoed through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The villagers' lanterns flickered, their light struggling against the growing storm. At the center of the altar, shadows began to coalesce, forming into a shape that grew larger and more defined with every second. It was an amorphous figure, its body shifting constantly like smoke caught in a whirlwind. This was no ordinary spirit. It was the embodiment of the villagers' betrayal and the river's unrelenting sorrow, a force born from centuries of unresolved pain. The shadow's eyes, glowing like embers, fixed on the villagers with a piercing intensity. It radiated malice and anguish, a presence so overwhelming that the villagers recoiled, their fear threatening to undo their fragile unity. The storm above raged, lightning flashing through the dark clouds, illuminating the figure's menacing form. The shadow stepped forward, its movements slow but deliberate, and the villagers began to panic. Their murmurs of regret turned to cries of fear, and some began to step back, their courage faltering. Nia felt the storm's energy pressing against her, but she refused to yield. Holding her lantern high, she stepped forward to face the shadow. "This is the pain you have carried for generations," Nia said, her voice strong and steady. "It is not the spirits who haunt you, it is your own guilt and fear. You cannot hide from it any longer. You must face it, or it will consume you." Her words struck a chord, and Doran the Elder took a hesitant step forward. His lantern flickered, but he held it high, its light cutting through the darkness. "We cannot undo the past," he said, his voice trembling, "but we can choose to make amends. We can choose to honor the bond we broke. His words emboldened the villagers, and one by one, they stepped forward, raising their lanterns until the clearing was filled with a fragile but growing light. The shadow roared, its form writhing as the villagers' light pushed against it. The storm above intensified, the wind howling through the clearing, but the villagers did not falter. Together, they stood against the shadow, their lanterns glowing brighter with each passing moment. Nia felt the balance begin to shift, the storm's energy receding as the villagers' unity grew stronger. The spirits, too, seemed to respond, their forms becoming more solid, their sorrow lifting ever so slightly. The shadow's cries grew weaker, its form flickering and shrinking until it dissolved into the air. The storm clouds began to part, revealing a sky filled with stars. The sanctuary was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, and the villagers knelt in silence, their lanterns steady and unwavering. The bond was beginning to heal. As Nia's words resonated through the sanctuary, the villagers stood together, their fear tempered by a growing sense of resolve. The shadow that had risen from the altar loomed before them, its form pulsing with a grief and anger that had festered for generations. It was a manifestation of their betrayal, greed, and denial, a force born not of the spirits, but of their own actions. The villagers' lanterns flickered uncertainly, their light dim against the overwhelming presence of the shadow. But Nia's lantern burned brightly, a beacon that refused to falter. She stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "You have carried this darkness for too long," she said. "Now is the time to confront it, to let the light within you dispel it." The villagers hesitated, but Doran the elder took the first step. His frail hands shook as he raised his lantern high, its light shining steadily despite its small size. "We were wrong," he said, his voice breaking but firm. "We turned our backs on the spirits and the river that gave us life. We let our fear blind us, and we allowed our greed to break the bond. But we are ready to make amends." His words ignited a spark within the villagers. One by one, they stepped forward, their lanterns glowing brighter as they joined Doran. They spoke of their regret, their desire to restore what had been lost, and their commitment to honoring the bond with the river and its guardians. The shadow recoiled, its form wavering as the villagers' light grew stronger. It writhed and shifted, its cries echoing through the sanctuary, but it could not withstand the collective light of their lanterns. Nia watched as the villagers stood together, their unity dispelling the darkness that had bound them for so long. The spirits, too, began to glow brighter, their forms solidifying as the bond between them and the villagers was reforged. The air was charged with energy, a powerful current of renewal that seemed to ripple through the sanctuary and beyond. As the shadow dissolved, the storm clouds above began to part, revealing a sky filled with stars. The sanctuary was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, and the spirit's sorrow seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. The villagers knelt before the altar, their lanterns glowing steadily, and Nia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The bond had been restored, not just through offerings and words, but through the villagers' willingness to confront their past and embrace their role as stewards of the river. The spirits stood silently, their presence a testament to the power of reconciliation and unity. Nia placed her lantern on the altar, its light merging with the glow of the villagers' lanterns. "The river will flow clear once more," she said softly, her voice carrying through the sanctuary. "But you must honor this bond every day. The spirits have forgiven, but they will always remember." The villagers bowed their heads in acknowledgement, their hearts filled with both gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the sanctuary began to fade, its light merging with the forest. Nia turned to lead the villagers back to the village, the promise of a brighter future lighting their path. The morning after the confrontation in the sanctuary, a profound stillness settled over the village. The storm that had raged in the sky and in the villagers' hearts had begun to dissipate, leaving behind an air of cautious hope. The villagers, having faced the shadow born of their own guilt and fear, carried the weight of their actions differently now. They moved with a sense of purpose, their lanterns still burning in their hands as they returned to their homes. Nia watched them from the edge of the river, her own lantern glowing steadily. She could feel the shift in the air. Subtle but undeniable, the river, though still touched by sorrow, seemed less burdened, its cries softer than they had been in decades. Nia walked along the riverbank, her thoughts heavy with the task that still lay ahead. Though the villagers had begun to atone, the bond between them and the spirits was far from fully mended. The curse was not yet lifted, and the river's sorrow persisted, a reminder that forgiveness was a process, not a single act. Nia knelt by the water, her fingers grazing the surface. It felt warmer, more alive, and she took it as a sign that the spirits were watching, waiting to see if the villagers would remain true to their renewed promises. Over the next days, Nia worked tirelessly with the villagers to rebuild the rituals that had once honored the river and its guardians. Together, they cleared the old altar of vines and debris, restoring it to its former glory. They practiced the songs and dances that had been forgotten, their melodies filling the air with a sense of reverence and gratitude. The river, in turn, began to show signs of change. Its waters, though still tinged with sorrow, shimmered faintly under the moonlight, as if responding to the villagers' efforts. For the first time in generations, there was a glimmer of balance, fragile, but growing stronger with each passing day. Despite the villagers' progress, Nia knew there was one lingering shadow that could not be ignored: Kael. His spirit had been absent from her visions and the sanctuary, but his actions were deeply intertwined with the curse. Nia sensed that his unresolved pain and regret still lingered, tethering him to the river's sorrow. Determined to find him, she returned to the riverbank under the light of the full moon. The crimson waters glowed faintly, and the cries of the river rose, once more, echoing through the still night air. Nia knelt by the water, holding her lantern close. "Kael," she called softly, her voice carrying over the current. "Show yourself. Your story is not yet finished." The river responded with ripples that grew into waves, and the air around Nia turned cold. From the depths of the water, a figure began to emerge. Kael, the warrior whose pact with the spirits had set so much of this tragedy in motion. His form was spectral, his armor tarnished and broken, and his face bore the weight of centuries of regret. He stepped onto the riverbank, his gaze fixed on Nia, with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. "Why have you called me?" he asked, his voice echoing like a distant storm. Nia met his gaze without flinching. "You carry a burden that is not yours alone," she said. "But it is time to confront the truth of your actions and their consequences." Kael's expression darkened, and the air around him crackled with energy. "I made my choices to save the village," he said, his voice rising. "I sacrificed everything for them, and they repaid me with silence and betrayal." His anger surged, and the river's cries grew louder, its waters churning violently. Nia held her ground, her lantern's light pushing back the darkness. "You are not alone in your pain," she said. "Eira sacrificed herself to restore the bond, and the villagers are finally beginning to atone. But your anger holds the river in its grip. Let it go, Kael. Release the burden you've carried for so long." Kael's form wavered, his anger giving way to a flicker of doubt. He stared at Nia for a long moment before stepping back into the river, his figure dissolving into the water. His presence left a lingering heaviness in the air, but Nia knew the first step toward his release had been taken. In the days following Kael's appearance, Nia continued her work with the villagers, but her thoughts often returned to the warrior. His spirit, though bound by regret and anger, had shown signs of longing for peace. Nia believed that his redemption was crucial to fully lifting the curse. She returned to the sanctuary, hoping to seek guidance from the spirits. The clearing was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, and the altar pulsed faintly with energy. Nia knelt before it, placing her lantern at its center. "I need your help," she said softly. "Kael's pain holds the river in its grasp, but he will not release it alone. Show me what I must do." The air around her shimmered, and the spirits began to appear, their forms faint but steady. The lead spirit stepped forward, its gaze solemn. Kael's redemption lies in the hands of those he sought to save. It said, the villagers must acknowledge his sacrifice, not as a hero to worship, but as a man who bore the weight of their actions. Nia understood the spirit's meaning. The villagers' silence had allowed Kael's pain to fester, turning his sacrifice into a curse. To release him, they would need to confront their own guilt and honor his memory with honesty and humility. Nia returned to the village and gathered the people once more. She told them of Kael's appearance and the spirit's words, urging them to remember him not as a legend, but as a man who had suffered deeply for their sake. The villagers listened in silence, their faces reflecting a mix of sorrow and shame. That evening, they held a vigil by the river, their lanterns glowing brightly as they recited prayers and songs in Kael's honor. As the night wore on, the river's cries softened, and the air grew still. Nia felt a sense of release, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. The spirits, too, seemed lighter, their forms more solid and luminous than before. The vigil marked a turning point in the village's journey toward reconciliation. With Kael's memory honored and the villagers' bond with the river slowly mending, the curse began to weaken. The river's waters, though still tinted with sorrow, no longer glowed crimson under the full moon. Its cries, once filled with anguish, became softer, almost melodic, as though the spirits were beginning to heal. Nia continued to guide the villagers, ensuring that their efforts remained consistent and sincere. Together, they restored the old rituals, their songs and offerings carrying a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. One evening, as Nia stood by the river, a vision came to her. The lantern in her hand glowed brighter than ever, its light reflecting off the water's surface. She saw Eira, her form radiant and at peace, standing at the altar with the river spirit. Kael appeared beside her, his armor restored, and his expression free of the anger and regret that had once defined him. The vision filled Nia with hope, and she realized the bond was nearly complete. The curse, born of betrayal and sorrow, was breaking under the weight of forgiveness and unity. The villagers gathered once more at the altar, their lanterns casting a golden glow over the sanctuary. They offered prayers and gifts, not out of fear but out of love and respect for the river and its guardians. As they sang, the spirits appeared, their forms solid and luminous. The lead spirit stepped forward, its voice resonating through the air. The bond is restored, it said. The river flows clear once more. A surge of energy rippled through the sanctuary, and the villagers knelt in reverence as the spirits dissolved into the air, their presence no longer one of sorrow but of peace. The following morning, the river was transformed. Its waters, once crimson and murky, ran clear and sparkling, reflecting the light of the rising sun. The air was filled with a sense of renewal, as though the land itself had been healed. The villagers gathered at the riverbank, their faces alight with awe and gratitude. For the first time in generations, the cries of the river were gone, replaced by the gentle sound of its flowing current. Nia stood among them, her lantern dimmed now that its task was complete. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the bond between the village and the river had been restored. The villagers worked together to rebuild their community, their unity stronger than ever. They honored the river with regular offerings and rituals, ensuring that the bond they had mended would remain unbroken. Nia watched them with pride, knowing that her journey had not only lifted the curse, but also brought the village closer to its true purpose. As she prepared to leave the riverbank, she felt a soft breeze at her back, carrying with it a faint melody, the song of Eira and the spirits, a reminder of the harmony they had fought so hard to reclaim. With the river flowing clear once more, the village of Arandale began to transform in ways that had not seemed possible. The land, once burdened by the weight of the curse, blossomed with life. Crops grew taller and healthier, the air felt lighter, and the once muted songs of birds returned to the forests. The villagers, too, changed. The unity they had discovered during their journey to mend the bond with the river carried into their daily lives. They no longer feared the spirits or the river's waters. Instead, They treated both with the reverence they deserved, weaving rituals and offerings into their routine to honor the guardians who had once protected them. Nia watched as the people worked together to rebuild not only their village, but also their connection to the natural world. Families gathered at the riverbank to sing the old songs, their melodies filled with gratitude rather than fear. Children played by the water's edge, their laughter mingling with the gentle rush of the current. The village square, once a place of hushed whispers and cautious glances, became a hub of activity and joy. Doran the elder often sat in the shade of the great oak tree, sharing stories of the river's history with the younger generation, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. For Nia, the transformation was deeply rewarding. She had seen the village at its lowest, plagued by fear and denial, and now she witnessed its rebirth. Her role as a healer extended beyond mending bodies. She had helped to heal the village's spirit. Though the weight of her journey still lingered in her heart, she found solace in the harmony that now thrived in Arandale. The villagers often thanked her, but she reminded them that it was their courage and unity that had brought about the change. As the days turned to weeks, the river's gentle song became a symbol of the peace they had achieved together. Nia's role in the village evolved as the bond with the river grew stronger. Though she had always been a healer, her connection to the spirits and her guidance during the curse's breaking elevated her to a position of deep respect. Villagers often sought her wisdom, not only for ailments of the body, but also for matters of the heart and spirit. She spent her days tending to the sick, teaching children about the river's history, and preserving the rituals that had once been forgotten. Her lantern, which had guided her through the darkest parts of her journey, now hung in her home as a reminder of the light she had brought to Arandale. Despite her central role in the village's transformation, Nia remained humble. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the visions of Eira's sacrifice, Kael's despair, and the villagers' betrayal. These memories were bittersweet, a reminder of the pain that had shaped their present harmony. Nia knew that her work was not finished. The bond with the river required constant care, and she dedicated herself to ensuring that future generations would uphold the lessons they had learned. She taught the villagers the importance of balance, of living in harmony with the natural world and honoring the spirits who watched over them. As the seasons changed, Nia began to think about her own legacy. She started to write down the story of the curse and its breaking, carefully preserving every detail so that it would not be forgotten. She included the names of those who had played a part, from Doran's wisdom to the courage of the young boy who had brought her the sacred herbs. The book became a treasured artifact, a testament to the village's resilience and the power of unity. Though Nia's journey had been fraught with challenges, she found peace in knowing that her work would endure, guiding others long after she was gone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village prepared for their evening rituals, Nia felt a familiar pull drawing her to the river. She walked alone to the water's edge, her lantern in hand, though it no longer burned as brightly as it once had. The river was quiet, its surface shimmering under the light of the crescent moon. Nia knelt by the water, placing her hand on its surface. The warmth she felt was different this time, softer, more inviting. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the river wash over her, and for the first time she heard a voice. It was Eira. Her voice was soft, like the rustling of leaves, but it carried a strength that resonated deeply within Nia. "Thank you," Eira said. "You have done what we could not. The river flows free, and the spirits are at peace." Nia opened her eyes to see a faint figure standing on the water, glowing softly with an ethereal light. Eira's face was serene, her sorrow replaced by gratitude. She held out her hands, and in them was a small, glowing talisman, the same one she had offered to the spirits in the vision. "Take this," Eira said. "It is a blessing for the village, reminder of the bond you have restored." Nia accepted the talisman, feeling its warmth pulse gently in her hands. As she looked up, Eira's form began to fade, merging with the light of the moon. Though her presence was gone, the peace she left behind was palpable. Nia returned to the village with the talisman, presenting it to Doran and the other elders. Together, they placed it on the altar in the sanctuary, where it would serve as a symbol of the village's renewed harmony with the river and its guardians. The villagers sang that night, their voices filled with gratitude, as the river's song joined theirs in a perfect harmony. The village had found peace, but Nia could not forget Kael. Though his spirit had begun to release its anger, she sensed that his journey was not yet complete. One night, she returned to the river, her lantern in hand. The water flowed calmly, but as Nia stood on the bank, a ripple appeared, followed by the faint outline of Kael's spectral form. His armor, once tarnished and broken, was now whole, and his expression was no longer twisted by anger. He looked at Nia with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Why do you call me again?" he asked, his voice softer than before. Nia stepped forward, her lantern casting a warm glow on his face. "Your pain has eased, but your place in this story is not yet finished," she said. "You gave everything to protect the village, but you must now find peace within yourself." Kael nodded slowly, his gaze turning toward the river. "I see now what I could not before," he said. "I sought to save them, but I became a part of their pain. I am ready to let go." As he spoke, the river began to glow, its light enveloping Kael's form. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the air was filled with a sense of profound stillness. When the light faded, Kael was gone. The river's waters flowed clear and bright, reflecting the stars above. Nia stood in silence, her heart heavy yet full. She knew that Kael's spirit had found peace, and his story had reached its end. As she returned to the village, she carried with her the knowledge that the curse was truly broken. The river, the spirits, and the people of Arandale had found harmony once more, and the echoes of their pain had finally been silenced. With Kael's spirit at peace and the bond fully restored, Nia felt the weight of her journey lifting. Yet, one final piece of the puzzle lingered in her mind. Though the river now flowed clear and the spirits were at peace, she sensed that her work was not entirely done. The spirits had given her guidance throughout her journey, but she had not yet seen their ultimate vision for the future of Arandale. One night, under the glow of the full moon, Nia returned to the sanctuary, her lantern glowing faintly as she approached the altar. She knelt before it, placing her hands on the smooth stone surface. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what lies ahead." The air shimmered and the lantern's light flared brightly, illuminating the clearing. The spirits appeared, their forms solid and radiant, no longer burdened by sorrow. The lead spirit stepped forward, its voice resonating through the sanctuary. "You have restored what was broken," it said. "But the bond is not just for you. It is for the future, for those who will come after you. They must never forget the lessons of the past." The air around Nia shifted, and a vision began to unfold. She saw the village generations from now, its people gathered by the river, their faces alight with joy and reverence. The rituals she had helped to restore were still practiced, their songs and offerings a testament to the enduring bond with the spirits. The vision shifted again, showing the forest and the river thriving, their harmony unbroken. The spirits moved freely among the people, their presence a source of guidance and strength. Nia felt a surge of hope as she realized that the future was bright, shaped by the unity and understanding she had helped to foster. When the vision faded, the spirits turned to her, their gazes filled with gratitude. "Your role is complete," they said. "The river flows clear, and the future is secure." Nia bowed her head, her heart full. The lantern dimmed, its light no longer needed as she rose to leave the sanctuary for the final time. With the river restored and the spirits at peace, the boundary between the mortal world and the spirit realm began to fade. The sanctuary, once a place of profound connection, now felt quieter, as though its purpose had been fulfilled. Nia noticed the changes immediately. The air, once charged with an almost overwhelming energy, was now calm and serene. The glowing symbols on the altar, and the trees began to dim, their light soft and fading into the natural beauty of the forest. The spirits, too, grew fainter, their forms blending seamlessly with the world around them. Nia spent one last evening in the sanctuary, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of Eira's sacrifice, Kael's redemption, and the villagers' transformation. Each step had been painful and difficult, but together they had healed a wound that had festered for generations. As dawn broke, the spirits appeared one final time, their forms shimmering in the golden light. The lead spirit approached Nia, its voice soft but resolute. "The bond will endure," it said. "The river no longer needs our watchful presence. We return to the flow of life where we belong." As the spirits faded, Nia felt a profound sense of peace. The sanctuary seemed to exhale, its energy settling into the earth and water it had once protected. The boundary between the worlds had closed, but the connection between the people and the spirits remained stronger than ever. Nia left the sanctuary, her steps light and her heart unburdened. She knew she would never return, but the memories of this sacred place would stay with her forever. In the days that followed, the villagers began to notice a new sound coming from the river. It was soft and melodic, a gentle hum that seemed to rise and fall with the current. The river, once known for its mournful cries, now sang with a quiet joy that resonated through the valley. The villagers took it as a sign that the spirits were truly at peace and that the bond they had worked so hard to restore was finally secure. They gathered by the water's edge each evening, their lanterns casting warm light over the flowing current, and listened to the river's song. For Nia, the song was both a reminder and a reward. It carried with it the echoes of Eira's voice, the harmony of the spirits, and the gratitude of the land itself. She often sat by the river, her lantern beside her, letting the music wash over her. Though her role as a healer continued, she found herself increasingly drawn to the rhythms of the natural world. The river's song became a source of inspiration, guiding her in her work and her interactions with the villagers. She taught them to listen, to understand the language of the river and the lessons it offered. The song also served as a promise, a reminder that the bond between the village and the river was alive, constantly evolving. It was not something to be taken for granted, but a relationship that required care and respect. The villagers embraced this understanding, weaving the river's song into their daily lives. They sang its melodies as they worked, using it to teach their children about the importance of unity and gratitude. The river, in turn, seemed to respond, its waters shimmering with a light that spoke of harmony and renewal. Though Nia had played a pivotal role in restoring the bond with the river, she never sought recognition or praise. Her focus remained on the village and its people, ensuring that the lessons they had learned endured. She continued her work as a healer, her reputation growing far beyond the boundaries of Arandale. Travelers came from distant villages to seek her guidance, bringing stories of their own struggles and the spirits they encountered. Nia welcomed them with kindness, sharing her knowledge and encouraging them to build their own bonds with the natural world. Despite her growing fame, Nia always returned to the river. It remained her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace and strength. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the trials she had faced, and the bonds she had forged. The river's song, always present, reminded her that harmony was possible even in the face of deep sorrow. It was a lesson she carried with her in everything she did, guiding her choices and her work. As the years passed, Nia began to see the fruits of her efforts. The children she had taught grew into adults who respected the river and its guardians. The rituals she had helped to restore became a cornerstone of the village's identity, ensuring that the bond with the spirits would never be forgotten. Nia knew that her work was never truly done, but she found peace in the knowledge that the village would continue to thrive. The river's song, a constant presence in her life, was a testament to the enduring power of unity and understanding. As time passed, Nia's story became intertwined with the history of Arandale. Her role in breaking the curse and restoring the bond with the river was told and retold, becoming a legend in its own right. The villagers honored her not as a mythical figure, but as a real woman whose courage and wisdom had shaped their lives. Her lantern, which had guided her through the darkest parts of her journey, was placed in the sanctuary, its light forever a symbol of hope and renewal. The book she had written, chronicling the events of the curse and its breaking, was kept in the village's library, its pages a reminder of the lessons they had learned. Each year, on the anniversary of the river's restoration, the villagers held a festival to celebrate the bond they had rebuilt. They sang the songs of the river, offered gifts at the altar, and shared stories of Nia, Eira, and Kael. The festival was a time of joy and reflection, a chance to honor the past while looking forward to the future. The river, in turn, seemed to sing more brightly during these celebrations, its song a melody of gratitude and harmony. Nia, now older and wiser, watched the festival from the edge of the crowd, her heart full. She saw the children dancing by the water's edge, the elders sharing stories, and the spirit's presence in the shimmering light of the river. She knew that her work had made a lasting impact, not just on the village, but on the bond between the people and the natural world. As the festival reached its peak, Nia stood quietly by the river, letting its song fill her soul. The legend of the river and its people would live on, a testament to the power of unity, courage, and love. Years passed, and the village of Arandale flourished as it had never done before. The river, once a source of sorrow, now symbolized life, renewal, and harmony. Its song remained a constant, a gentle melody that wove through the lives of the villagers, reminding them of the bond they had restored. The spirits no longer appeared as they once had, but their presence could still be felt in the warmth of the water, the vibrancy of the land, and the quiet moments when the river seemed to hum with unseen energy. Arandale was no longer defined by its past, but by the resilience and unity that had carried it forward. Nia, now older, had become a beloved figure in the village, her wisdom sought by all. Though her steps were slower and her hair streaked with silver, her spirit remained strong. She often sat by the river, her lantern beside her, watching as the current carried leaves and flowers downstream. The river was a part of her as much as she was a part of it. Her journey had ended, but its lessons continued to shape her and the people she had guided. The village had become a reflection of the harmony she had worked so hard to restore, a place where people lived in balance with the natural world and honored the bond with the spirits. On a quiet morning as the sun rose over the mountains, Nia felt a familiar pull. She walked to the sanctuary one last time, her lantern glowing faintly in her hand. The sanctuary, though quiet and still, radiated a sense of peace. The altar, adorned with offerings from generations of villagers, glimmered softly in the dawn light. Nia placed her lantern on the altar, its glow merging with the light of the sanctuary. She knelt before it, her heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady, "for guiding me, for trusting me, and for allowing me to be part of this story." As Nia rose, she felt a warmth envelop her, as though the spirits themselves were offering their blessing. The air was filled with a faint melody, the river's song, joined by the voices of the spirits, a harmony that seemed to transcend time. Nia smiled, her heart light as she walked back to the village. She knew that her role was complete, her work a part of something greater than herself. The river would continue to flow, its bond with the village unbroken, a legacy that would endure for generations. That evening, as the villagers gathered by the river to sing and celebrate, the sky filled with stars, their light reflecting in the clear waters. Nia sat among them, her gaze fixed on the river. It was no longer the weeping river of legend, but a source of life and hope. Its flow was eternal, a reminder that even the deepest sorrow could give way to harmony and renewal. And as the villagers' voices rose in song, Nia felt at peace, knowing that the river's story and her own would live on forever.